Next, we're going to put the UV map on this. So I'm going to select my geometry, and I'll right-click on it, and I'm going to choose Assign New Material. Now I want this to be a shiny soda can, so I'm going to add a blend. And I'll go over to my blend number 2, and I'm just going to name this CokeCan, and I'll put the word skin at the end of this. And I'm going to, instead of just add a random texture map, I'm going to the end of the color tab, and I'm going to click on the checkerboard pattern, and from the Create Render node, rather than click on File, I'm going to click on the built-in checkerboard pattern. And I'm going to go back to my viewport and hit 6 on the keyboard. Now you'll see that in some capacity that checkerboard has been applied, and it's not quite what I want by any means. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the faces of the vertical part of the can, and I'm going to put cylindrical mapping on it. Now, in order to do that pretty cleanly, I'm going to go to my front view again, and in my front view, I'll hold down my space bar and I'm going to choose face. Now, very often the checkerboard pattern can be a distraction, so I'll hit 5 on the keyboard. Now I'm going to select those faces. Now, I need to go up a little further because I want to go up right against the top of that can. I could hold Shift and Control and add them in, but the keyboard function is if I hold my Shift key and I hit my close bracket for HTML, it's going to go up and select the next available row of polygon faces that I want. So I've got what I want. If I happen to go too far, I can hold a Shift, and if I tap the Open HTML, it will delete rows of selected faces. Now, once I've got that, I'm going to hold down the space bar. I'm going to go to UVs and choose cylindrical mapping. Now, that's looking pretty good, but based on how the cylindrical mapping works, I need to have these 2 little red boxes that we see here and here meet back here. If I was to drag to the front, you can see it's increasing that texture map, which means it would repeat the label a number of times on the can, and I don't want that. So if I drag it back till they meet at the back end of this, that means my texture map will be applied to the cylindrical surface just once. I'm going to right-click, and before I do, actually, I want to make sure that these are square. Right now they're flattened out rectangles. So I'm going to go to the back here, and I'm going to click on that red T. And what that allows me to do now is scale that texture, those UVs on the can shape. So I'm just going to drag this up until those checkers are perfectly square, and that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go to my object mode. I'm going to save. Continue. Now I have to deal with this top of the can as well as the bottom. And that's planar mapping. So I'm going to go to 5 on the keyboard. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to choose face. Now, if I wanted to, I'd probably go into my side view and click and drag like so. I'm going to return, and sure enough, I've got what I want. I'm going to hit 6 so I can see my texture map again. And I'm going to use a planar mapping. I'm going to hold down the space bar, UVs, and I will go to planar mapping. I'm going to go to the attributes for it, and I'm going to make sure it's set for Y. And I'll hit apply. So you can see now it's mapped it pretty nicely on the top of the can. Now I want to scale this so the checkers are kind of almost the same size as this. So what I'm going to do though is, because it's a planar surface, and the top of that can is pretty symmetrical, I can go to the channels window now. And in the channels window, you'll see project width and project height. Now, I've got to keep these 2 numbers exactly the same. And I'm going to select both of them. I'm going to put the number 10 in. And you can see it's made that checker pattern larger than it had been. And that looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be exactly the same size as these. Now, let's go ahead and let's go to our texture editor. So I'm going to go back to my object mode. I'll come back and I'll address the bottom. But I'm going to select the can now in the object mode, and I'm going to the texture editor. And if you don't see the texture editor, which is this green box with a checkerboard in it, I could hold down Control Shift, and we would go to UVs, and at the very top is UV editor. Okay? So when I click on that now, I'm going to see a reference for the wrap around the cylindrical part of the can and then the can lid. So there's a couple of things I have to do here. Now when you first introduce this, you might see the checkerboard pattern, like so. You can turn that off, and really is probably better that turn them off now because these are square. I don't have to worry about that texture as a reference anymore. So now I'm going to turn off the texture, that checkerboard pattern, with this little mountain range up here on my UV editor. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to move these so they're separated out. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to right click and I'm choosing shell. Any sort of a textured UV map that we create is known as a shell. I'm going to select anywhere on this. I'll hit W, and I'm just going to move this outside that upper right-hand corner quadrant. Now while I've got this selected, you'll notice that it's red, which means that the texture would be backwards if I brought it in from Photoshop. And this is something you have to deal with in Maya. Very often when you create a shape, it just reverses the UV map. And it's a simple fix. While it's still selected, I'll go up to polygons and choose flip. And now it's blue, which means that if I have text on this, it will appear the way it should, not upside down or reversed. I'm going to do the same with the top of the can. I'm going to come up and select it, polygons, flip. I'm going to move the top of the can like so. I'll select the cylindrical part of the can. I'm going to scale it a little bit, just a little bit inside like that. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to put my planar mapping on the bottom of the can. Now this is insignificant if it's just going to sit on a surface, but if this can were spinning around in an animation, we saw the bottom, it might look a little funky there. So I'm going to hit 5 on the keyboard. I'll right click and choose face, and I'll start to select the faces that I need to apply planar mapping to. So pretty much in a modern can, the only faces that might be different in color based on the wrap of the label would probably be this series that I've just selected. Once again, I'm going to go to UV maps, and I'm simply going to click on planar because it's already set for y-axis. I'll hit 6 on the keyboard. There's my checkerboard. I'm going to go to the channel window, and I'm going to change projection height and width both to 10. And now I see the bottom of my can. And I'm going to go to shell, select the bottom, hit W, and I'm going to pull that outside the area where it all wraps. And I'll hit Command S to save. I'm going to right click and go back to my object mode. So now we have our UV editor and we have our texture mapped in, ready to be exported to Photoshop.